Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Yvonne Garcia, and I'm the chair of the Chamber's Women's Network Advisory Board, as well as the Chief of Staff, Chairman and CEO of State Street, Ron O'Hanley, and Head of Global Communications at State Street. Before we dive in today, I want to remind everyone that nominations are open for the 2022 Pinnacle Awards. You've probably seen some of our ads on Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platforms, and I really encourage you to nominate a woman that you may know who's just changing Greater Boston through her vision, excellence, and commitment. Please make sure that you visit our website at bostonchamber.com and submit your nomination. I'd also like to help virtually introduce all of our attendees today. We have an extraordinary lineup of wonderful women who in their own right are changing the landscape here in Boston. I hope you'll take advantage also of our chat function. We always love to hear what you have to say, whether you have a question or have a point of view. So there's a chat function and it'll help our other attendees view your thoughts and also provide a platform for others to voice theirs. I encourage you to join us also in today's discussion on social media. We're big on trending and ensuring that others have access to the great content that we're sharing with you today. So it's hashtag Boston Biz Women and the @Boston Chamber. Please make sure that you also enter any questions that you have for our guest speakers in a Q&A feature on your screen as well. So plenty of opportunities to voice your perspective, point of view, or ask a question of our speakers today. And then lastly, the program is always recorded. So if there's anyone who you'd like to share this with, it'll be posted on our YouTube page next week, and feel free to share the link. Today's conversation is an interesting one because it's imperative for us as a business community, as well as leaders, in our organizations, to be having this conversation. Over the past year and a half, discussions around already a vulnerable system of childcare and how it relates to employee engagement as well as employment were brought to the forefront. I know at State Street, when we have our employee calls, it's always top of mind and topics that our employees bring up as a concern. Today, our expert panel will speak to how children directly correlate to how childcare and children at times directly correlate to productivity, employment engagement, and retention, as well as what the role of employers should be and what organizations are doing to incentivize their working parents. Lastly, how we can collaborate with childcare providers to support and provide effective solutions. So with that, I'd like to give a huge thank you to our Women's Network sponsor, Liberty Mutual Insurance. Their continued support and partnership throughout the years have allowed us to bring you all of this content today. So now I'd like to welcome Verlinda DiMarino. She's the Vice President of Director of Benefit Programs and Global Total Rewards at Liberty Mutual, to introduce today's featured speaker. So thanks for joining us, Verlinda, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Yvonne. I'm very excited to be here today. On behalf of Liberty Mutual, it is my pleasure to introduce today's panel of inspiring leaders. Joining us first is Caitlin Codella-Lowe from the U.S. Chamber Foundation Center for Education and Workforce, where Caitlin is the Vice President of Policy and Programs. Caitlin develops and oversees the Chamber Foundation's programs for early childhood education, K through 12 education, and leads the center's commitment to college and career readiness. She has more than a decade of experience in public policy and project management. She has also authored and contributed to numerous publications around education reform and impacts of childcare. Next, we have Turan Dorsey, Foundation Fellow for Eastern Bank Charitable Foundation, also former Chief of Education for the City of Boston and co-founder of Change Agency Ltd. He is also a member of the Massachusetts Business Roundtable, Coalition for Early Childhood Education, and co-chairs for the Mass Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. Ron is a researcher, policymaker, and strategist who has focused his career on systems change and civic innovation. His passion to develop and execute strategies to improve early childhood outcomes in the region are reflected by his impressive resume. He also consults independently on issues related to economic inclusion and racial justice in Boston. Thank you for being with us here with us today, Ron. Our next speaker is Sarah Hamilton. Sarah is the Senior Director of Global Human Experience at WorkHuman, the world's fastest growing social recognition and continuous performance management platform. As an HR leader, Sarah is passionate about building a work environment where all employees have a voice and strong sense of belonging. She believes her role is to be a true partner to employees and lift them up and inspire them to do their best work. Last, but certainly not least, we are joined by Dr. Bridget Terry Long. Bridget is the Dean and Sarris Professor of Education and Economics at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She has been a member of the Harvard faculty since 2000. Bridget is an economist whose research focuses on the impact of factors such as affordability and academic preparation on college student outcomes. She sits on the board and advises many educational organizations and associations, such as the National Board for Education Sciences and the National Academy of Education. Bridget is also a co-chair for the Massachusetts Coalition for Early Childhood Education, and her passion and expansive knowledge on the impacts of quality education makes her the perfect candidate to lead today's imperative conversation. We are truly honored to have all of you here today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. With that, I will turn it over to you, Bridget.
Thank you, Verlinda, and thank you, Yvonne, and welcome everyone for this wonderful event. The start of the pandemic in early 2020 had an immediate effect on working parents when childcare centers and schools closed. So let's consider the magnitude of this problem. 71% of families with young children have both parents in the workforce. The lack of available, affordable, and stable early childhood options limits professional opportunity and personal income. And these childcare-related challenges are disproportionately impacting women. Only 44% of employed women report that their employer is offering flexible work hours, and only 13% have access to paid family leave. And as a result, women felt the brunt of the closure of the childcare centers, and many chose to leave the workforce altogether. As of today, more than 2 million women have left the paid labor force, erasing decades of employment gains in this recession that we have faced. Families absolutely need and deserve a robust and sustainable network of early childcare education options to support their growth. And if we think for a moment about the children, this is a critical issue for children. The early years are critical to their brain development. 80% of brain development occurs within the first 3 years, 90% in the first 5. And we know that children who participate in high quality early childhood education programs are twice as likely to attend college. So we need to give families high quality, affordable options. So this issue is critical at an individual level, a family level, as well as a community level. And that's why I've been so proud to co-chair the Massachusetts Business Coalition for Early Childhood Education. And it's wonderful to have the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce as a coalition partner in that work. The coalition is working to advocate for policies and programs that make early childcare education more readily available to Massachusetts workers and to collaborate around employer best practices. Without the proper infrastructure and employer support, it will be challenging for parents to return to work, challenging for children to thrive, and for our communities and economy to move forward. And so today, we will be discussing how business organizations can better support working parents. So I'm excited to kick off the conversation with our panelists. Welcome again, Caitlin, Sarah, and Ron. So I want to get us started by asking a question that all of you can answer. Just asking how childcare bearers affect our workforce daily, and why this issue is so important and needs to be addressed by the greater business community. Caitlin, I wonder if we could start with you.
Sure, and thank you so much for having us. Thank you to the Boston Chamber. Thank you, Dr. Long, for this conversation. I will answer that in two ways. One, because childcare is a workforce issue, as you laid out. It's essential to support the workforce of today, and it's vital to develop the workforce of tomorrow. I can personally attest to that specifically today. I have a 2-year-old whose childcare center shut down. Shockingly this morning, my husband and I were running around trying to figure out how do we work 2 full-time jobs and have an active 2-year-old at home. But thank God nap time lined itself up right with this event. So if you see a 2-year-old bust in, I will turn off my camera. But truly, even before the pandemic, we saw how childcare breakdowns and barriers to high quality, affordable childcare negatively impacts working families and economies. As you noted, childcare enables more than 14 million parents with young children to participate in the workforce. But it also, this was an issue prior to the pandemic. We were not at full capacity then. 1 in 2 parents, working parents, say their decision to leave the workforce was due to lack of available childcare. Working fathers between the age of 18 and 36 are more likely to say that they are willing to change a job or a career to better manage a work-life demand. And what's more, 1/3 of highly educated and highly skilled women are dropping out of the workforce after having children. 74% of them cite lack of childcare as the reason why. Layering on that, the fact that replacing an employee can cost a company up to 150% of an individual's salary. In a series of surveys the Chamber Foundation conducted last year, from June 2020 to November 2020, so smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, we found that 2/3 of working parents had changed their childcare arrangements due to COVID. And nearly a year into the pandemic, the majority had yet to find a permanent solution. 11% of working parents had already turned down a new job or a promotion due to lack of childcare, and half of parents who left the workforce cited childcare was the reason why they left. Just one more piece of information here is just prior to the pandemic, so the end of February 2020, the Chamber released a series of reports focusing on 4 states, Idaho, Iowa, Mississippi, and Pennsylvania. We called this report series Untapped Potential. These research briefs, which are on our website, and I can certainly send over to the Boston Chamber, showed that those 4 states were losing a combined $3 billion in economic potential due to childcare breakdowns. In the next few weeks, we'll be releasing a second cohort of these in Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Missouri, Texas, and West Virginia. This survey was conducted during the pandemic and reflects an even greater level of childcare insecurity and billions upon billions of dollars in lost potential.
Thank you, Caitlin. You certainly have given us a lot to chew on to get started. Ron, I wonder if you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Long, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. Caitlin, I was cataloging all of those stats as you were. I can't write fast enough to cover all of that, but you framed it so well. I think I will just point to a couple of the Ready Nation stats about productivity, that U.S. businesses are losing approximately $57 billion in annual revenue because of the trade-off on childcare versus work. We're seeing 45% of parents absent from work at least once due to a childcare breakdown as well. We know that Massachusetts is among the most expensive states for childcare, with the average cost being somewhere around $20,000. It is cheaper to send some young people to college in Massachusetts than it is to send them to daycare or early learning. And in Suffolk County, many families are spending up to or beyond 20% of their average household income each year on childcare. So we know that this is untenable, but I think in terms of, where we think about what we need to do, one, I think the private sector does have a role to play in helping reframe what is a false choice between people and productivity. Even in modern industry, you don't get to the former without the latter. You need people to make sure that we are productive and profitable, and that we are making progress toward a lot of the common good that we intend. If you believe this, as I do, then I'd suggest that business as a primary agent in some of this false framing then actually has the power to directly reframe and repair what's wrong with this part of the social contract. The other piece of this is that we need to make sure the private sector is on board with this, because the private sector has effectively been a free rider to the early childhood system for quite a while. It's not to be disparaging, but it is to name that time is over. We can't afford, families can't afford, business can't afford for business not to bring the full breadth of its capital to their enterprise of making sure that families have available to them what my colleague Nancy Steger at Eastern Bank recently said is effectively a utility. So you can't turn off the power if we believe early childhood is a utility. You can't turn off the gas and the electricity and expect to be functioning. This is a public good, which the private sector, I think, has a role in both giving voice to, as well as financing and supporting a public good that's desperately needed.
Thank you, Ron. And Sarah.
Yes, it's sobering when you hear all of the stats being laid out like that.
Absolutely.
I think from an HR perspective, something for us at WorkHuman, childcare has always been of paramount importance to us because parents actually make up more than half our workforce at WorkHuman. And so that is something that we have always tried to have the lens over. And during COVID, I think we all got a glimpse into just how difficult this has been for our humans, because we were all on Zoom and we were all watching, as Caitlin mentioned today, their 2-year-olds, with not having childcare because daycares were shut down, and people bringing their little humans into the screen. And it has become very common practice to see that. And I think that we talk a lot about bringing the whole human self to work, and family makes up, it's probably the most important part of the human self. And so, to view these two things as separate, right? To expect that when you walk in the door to your company, you leave your family behind. You are a mom whether you're at work or whether you're home, right? So I think that the pandemic has allowed us to have more of a view into that. And I would say that there is an expectation now from your employees going forward that they are going to be expecting to have flexibility, that you are thinking about this, that you are thinking about what this means for them. Like, there isn't a switch that we can just flip off to say, okay, the pandemic's pretty much over now, so everybody, we're going to go back to the way it was before. Like, there is no way it was before. And so we really need to keep these topics top of mind across everything that we're doing, because it's not going away. It's not just going to disappear. And I think we've all just had such a more clear picture into what life has been like for our people.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I think you've all touched upon, the fact that these are long-standing problems, and certainly the last 18 months with COVID really underscored how deep they are, how many of our families, our community members, this is affecting. So I'm wondering, if, as a next question, have you seen the relationship between childcare issues and businesses change? Do you think businesses have started to realize how imperative it is to address these challenges that we've seen during the last 18 months? Ron, could you start us off this time?
Sure. I think I have seen growth and progress over the last 18 months. If nothing else, awareness has grown among the companies and the business leaders that I've been in touch with that workers are struggling with the challenges and the false choice between work and family. A handful of employer surveys conducted over the last year, 18 months, show that an overwhelming majority of companies have begun to take steps to learn more directly from their employees about the challenges that they're trying to navigate. And I think that we're also seeing the first generation of mostly benefits-based solutions. They range from greater scheduling, flexibility, and remote learning, of course, to more mental health and wellness supports for employees, some additional assistance to pay for care and more paid leave, as well as higher quality information about the resources that are available for employees as well. But, I do want to name that we may be talking about a particular class of workers who may be benefiting most greatly from this early learning by companies. If you have to show up at work every day during the pandemic, if you've got a bare bones benefits package, I'm not sure that you are yet benefiting from what companies are learning about what it means to more holistically support their employees, particularly women and women of color. Even though we're seeing greater responsiveness and activity from business, I will close by saying that I still hear a worrying set of questions, even as they're learning. The first question is either who can fix this, or the follow-up question is who's going to tell us what to do? And so, while I think it's the proper deference to the early childhood field and the expertise of the people on the ground, parents, and the folks who do the work, I don't want the private sector to abdicate its agency, power, and authority to act urgently on this. Now, it has to be done in collaboration with early childhood experts and probably increasingly in collaboration with government. But what we don't want the private sector to do is to sit back and wait for someone else.
Thank you. I'd love to hear, Caitlin, Sarah, your thoughts as well. And I think we're starting to get into what are the specific things that businesses could be doing.
Sure. And I will just add that, Ron makes a lot of really good points. I think that, along with the rest of the country, we've seen childcare go from a niche issue prior to the pandemic to a top priority since the pandemic. And we've seen the idea of childcare and the idea of providing support and benefits to working parents go from being viewed as a personal issue and being, sort of the personal issue of a parent to now being a concern of the business. And it both remains an issue of just retention, and it also has become an increasingly important recruitment tool for potential employees. And I think, Ron makes a good point that is this for all employees? Not yet. And I think we need to get to that. But this has been sort of seen over the last 18 months as sort of not a place that you can just think about adding a benefits, but to a place of how are you going to provide that benefit? Because, parents as employees are key to the workforce.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see these conversations happening at the executive table as well. So before, it might have been discussions that were happening maybe amongst the HR team or in different pockets, but now these conversations have been front and center in most executive discussions that I've had as we are talking about our humans and what it looks like when we return to different ways of working. And I think that's a big change than I've ever seen before, it being talked about that frequently at that level. And I think that, as I was touching on earlier, there is an expectation now from employees. And so if companies that are slower on the uptick to change and really be making this front and center, they're actually gonna lose out because so many others are really starting to make this front and center in their discussions and really being intentional about making change. And so these employees are easily going to be able to find organizations that are going to support them in what they are looking for, because they are absolutely going to expect it to be front of mind.
Right. So Ron, I think you called it earlier, business had kind of been a free rider. Caitlin, you said it's gone from a niche topic to now being something more general. I hear the shifting of the responsibility, certainly the awareness and attention, but maybe even action being taken. But pausing for a minute, there have been devastating effects on working families with COVID, but it has not been felt equally. There's been a lot of inequality that we're seeing in the system that has existed for a long time, but different types of families have felt this either more strongly. And so I'm wondering, if we take that into account, what can we do to try to deal with those challenges that were exacerbated? How can childcare institution and employers of low-wage working parents try to address these inequities? What can they do? Sarah, why don't we start with you this time?
Sorry, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that some immediate steps that companies can take and employers can take is to be intentional about trying to solve the issue. So it's one thing to talk about it, but if you're not looking at whether it's inequities across the workplace and what's actually happening with the demographic of your working parents, if you're not being intentional about the programs that you are putting into place, how that is affecting, those programs are affecting your working parents, what is the experience that you're trying to create for them? What does this mean for and affecting the working parents? I think if you're not being intentional about these things, it's going to be really hard for you to institute change. It can't just be something that's an afterthought. It has to be front and center. And I think that there's another piece to this too that we don't talk about enough, which is we need to normalize the role that men actually play in this situation. And men can actually be really huge change agents in this area. It is still, we've come a long way, but it is still your first gut reaction to if there's a sick kid at home or if you got to cancel a business trip, right? It is more customary still that it is the mom or the woman that is dropping everything to go run to get their kid. And I think that is something I have a manager actually, we talk about this with our leadership team, and he is so good about really making sure that whenever he is leaving the office, if it has anything to do with his kids, he is making that very vocal. He is posting it on Slack. He is telling his team. And it's little things like that the more we can start to normalize the role of men in this, we can start to hopefully over time spread that burden and spread that burden among working parents and maybe the conversation shifts to parents versus always being about the women's role in this. And I think that's an important step that we need to start taking and making it okay from the top down for the role that our men play in this as well.
Great, thank you. No, that definitely applies, I think, for all workers and what we're modeling as leadership teams. But going back to the issue of some of the inequalities that we're seeing, mm-hmm. Ron, Caitlin? Go ahead, Ron.
Sure. So maybe I'll come at this from two perspectives. One is internal to companies, but the other is external, looking out to the early childhood field, because there's a form of injustice happening in that we are not supporting workers in the field who are predominantly women and increasingly women of color. And if we don't do that, then we'll perpetuate a number of inequities. But let me talk first about what can happen inside of companies. And I think Sarah suggested this around intentionality as well. The things that we're learning from employees about what they're struggling with, those lessons need to be matrixed at minimum into your DEI strategy. Because when we're talking about who is disproportionately being affected by the child care crisis and having to make these false choices, it's women of color, it's families of color in many companies. So we need companies kind of matrixing through strategy, DEI, the operations approach, what we're learning and what each part of the business can be doing to address the challenges that are raised, and at each turn asking, for whom do we need to do something extraordinary to make sure that we are both honoring their service to the company, but also providing a level of stability that workers need. The other piece is this is a leadership opportunity for many people in your company to step up who are facing these challenges and to lead the company to the solutions. Let's give them the authority, not necessarily just the responsibility, because there is a difference between responsibility and authority. But let's give them the authority to start creating some of these solutions and reward them for their leadership as they make our companies better. As I think about what's happening in the field, again, if early childhood is a utility, or maybe even if we're looking at it as a critical part of supply chain for all of our industries, then we have to make sure that those workers are taken care of. We've experimented at Eastern Bank Foundation with a partnership with the Family Independence Initiative, basically to look at a one-time guaranteed minimum income payment for early childhood workers who were displaced and furloughed during the pandemic. We've partnered with EEC now to experiment with a new payment system that will hopefully transfer more revenue apart from subsidy to compensation. We've got a critical compensation problem in the field, and there's work that we need to do to make sure that early childhood provider businesses are just more stable and economically sustainable businesses by investing in shared services and other supports for them. If we don't fix the economic justice challenge in the early childhood field, a number of crises will persist.
Absolutely. And I want to thank those who are watching and participating and submitting your questions. We're going to be getting and pulling in your questions in just a moment. I want to highlight one, though, that just came in because I think it's related. And Sarah, you definitely emphasized the need to bring in partners, partners who are often men into the conversation. But what do we do about single working parents when you don't have another adult in the household to be part of the backup system? You know, we need to build these structures that can support families that look in all different shapes and sizes. And again, particularly single parents, affecting a lot of communities of color. I don't know if anyone wants to touch on that before we move on. Definitely a difficult challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great point. And I think that looking at ways in which you can support single parents through whether it's schedules, whether it's, you know, looking at and to Teron's point about really talking to them about what it is exactly that they need and being intentional about the support that you're able to give them. If you're not asking the question, if you're not having those conversations, if you're not having those human to human moments, really trying to understand what is important to them and what is the support that they need, then you're just going to be making assumptions. And as a, you know, like you're not going to be able to connect in that way to be able to get them what they need. So I think it's so important to have those conversations and to be, again, I keep going back to this note of intention, but it's so important to make that a part of everything that you do across the board. And I just don't think it happens enough. You know, we make generalizations. We say, you know, well, we look at it under one lens and we're not looking at it across the board and how this can affect all different types of situations. So I think having those conversations and really just asking and building your support system around that is critical.
Absolutely. So intention, knowing your employees and the challenges that they're facing, having those conversations, integrating this as part of your DEI work, all very important things. But then what do you do with that information? So I want to bring Caitlin back into the conversation. You know, what are some of the tactical steps that employers can take? And this is actually part of a larger conversation as well with, you know, government action and how that interacts with business. Caitlin, could you comment on that?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, both Ron and Sarah's points around intentionality is really important. And we have found that sometimes the easiest place to start is by simply just asking the question, as everyone has identified as being sort of the most important place here. Earlier this year, we released an executive brief called Essential Care for Essential Workers. Now, of course, this could be This was in our minds, we wrote it thinking about every worker that was going to a location where, you know, the other workers sort of had the ability to stay home in the midst of this work remotely. But what it ended up being is just a roadmap for senior leaders of any organization, any industry, to think through what options are available to address childcare needs for both frontline workers, primary working shift, traditional hours, or just, you know, 9 to 5 desk jobs. It includes information on what to expect about the, you know, sort of journey of identifying what strategy is going to work best for you, and then how to actually put those strategies into action. And all of them start with this really important question around, have you had that conversation with your employees? Have you surveyed them? Have you created a working parents or a working parents working group? You know, a number of ways that you can just sort of touch around this conversation, but then sort of dig deeper into what challenges are you really experiencing as a workforce. We did this work because we were getting calls from employers of every size and every sector that were reaching out to say, what can we do right now to support our employees? What can we do to support working parents at this moment? And so what we found was that 89% of the employers were looking for a solution to put into play in the next 6 months because their employees had been greatly impacted by the breakdown of the system. That same survey underscored the widespread recognition of challenges in a few key stats here. 50% of working parents who had not returned back cited childcare as the reason. 1 in 5 working parents were unsure if they would ever be able to return to their pre-COVID work situation for a myriad of reasons. And 16% of employers had experienced employers leaving the job altogether because they could not find the childcare. The good news is that the solutions for business are wide-ranging, and they have a lot of positive impact for employers and employees alike. So what I'm hopeful for is that these childcare programs are no longer just sort of thought of as a recruitment tool for large companies that can afford it, but rather a business community as a whole understands the importance of supporting a high quality, affordable, accessible early childhood system that's imperative to having a strong workforce and a strong economy. That brief is also, I have also given to the chamber, so you know we can send that out to everyone as well if they're interested in learning more. Oh, and I also wanted to touch, Dr. Long, on what tax incentives might be out there right now for employers. There is a lot of things that are happening at the federal level, and we won't get into the gritty details of all of that because that would be a whole nother conversation. But there are things in terms of incentives for businesses, and I would encourage businesses to familiarize themselves with the employer-provided child care tax credit, commonly referred to as the EPCCTC, because everything is an acronym in DC. This is for businesses to provide childcare to their employees. The federal government offers companies a tax credit to help cover the costs associated with, so this is under the Internal Revenue Code section 45F. It offers employers a tax credit of up to 25% of qualified childcare expenditures, 10% of qualified childcare research and referral expenditures. Now, this is a really important note. The credit is currently capped at $150,000, meaning that employers would have to spend around $430,000 to receive the full credit, and any further spending exceeding that amount would not be reimbursed. So I hate to say it, but it's not surprisingly that there has been historically not a lot of companies that have used this tax credit. It's considered, you know, small potatoes in terms of a tax credit. And in fact, most corporate accountants don't even know about it. However, there has been sort of a new breath that has been, you know, sort of talked about in this specific conversation recently, because there has been a lot of talk from both the White House and, you know, committees both on the Hill that have discussed upping the the employer provided child care tax credit, the EPCCTC, from 25% to 50% up to the first $1 million of costs. So, that could potentially be game changing. I think that there is a lot of ways that language could be tweaked to really impact employers of every size and every sector, especially in this world of sort of remote work where not everyone is going to a center and just sitting, going to work. You don't want to go to work to drop your kid off at a center, then go home to work, right? So there are ways that we could make this particular tax credit for businesses a little bit more possible. But the good news is that there are conversations to sort of up that. And we wait to see what that actually means. But currently there is this $150,000 tax credit.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. So clearly this is an evolving situation at the federal level in terms of government policy, something that we all should be watching or advocating for. But in the meantime, again, we can hear again and again, this is what employees are demanding. This is what they need. So turning back to Ron and to Sarah to bring you back in, are there examples, and this is actually a question that came from the audience, are there exemplary models that we've seen either nationally or by city, state, particular organizations, practices that might be able to be copied by other businesses?
Sure. There are some leaders that we can follow, and I think particularly in the greater Boston area, the construction field may be among the leaders. So when I think about the Building Pathways pre-apprenticeship program, a lot of the design of Building Pathways starts with the question, what does it take for people to train and to work? The answer arrives at a set of wraparound services that include childcare, transportation, and a number of other things that aren't just about the time that it takes to get through that pre-apprenticeship program, but once you are on site and working, what are those additional supports, particularly for single parents that they need? I'm also a fan of the work that Community Labor United is doing right now, because they recognize that not everybody works banker's hours, and I'm not sure that bankers work banker's hours anymore. But what they've done is created a partnership with a network of family childcare agencies where they pay them to open early and pay them to stay open late. So this is for workers who need to be on site at 6 a.m. and need to do a very early drop off. This is for workers who need to be at work beyond 6 p.m. And need to do a very late pickup. So I think we need to pay attention to where those experiments are going. Finally, I would offer the work of Dana-Farber, which I've been a fan of under the leadership of Nina Dickerman over there, where they have set up a scholarship-based program indexed to employees' income, where they can select a family child care provider based on a network that they have curated themselves. And Dana-Farber has experimented both with partnerships with organizations like Horizons, as well as with neighborhood-based small providers as well. There are trade-offs to each, but what I love is that they've been intentional about creating a business opportunity largely for women of color who own these small businesses, but also creating a solution that is really equity-based and is about how much employees make and their level of need.
Okay, very helpful. And what about you, Sarah? What innovative HR and workplace culture practices have you seen?
Sure, and I was smiling when you were talking about the partnerships, because that's an avenue that we personally are going down as well. And then I've heard a lot more organizations are trying to partner with organizations, whether it be Bright Horizons or others, and actually looking at it through the offerings based on earnings as well. And so having different tiers of support and such. So I think that 100% is something that I'm seeing as well. I think that from a recruiting practice, we have an opportunity to take advantage of the Great Resignation. Kind of sick of that word now at this point, but I'll use it for the sake of my point. But I think we have an opportunity to take advantage of that because we can look at different ways of working, different types of working, flexible hours. Companies can be looking at more part-time workers, the notion of mother's hours. we can look at different schedules and different ways of working and get more creative rather than it just being this 9 to 5 window that we've always stuck within. And how can we change roles and working hours to accommodate that? I think Caitlin touched on this earlier, but the importance of employee-led ERGs, at least for us personally, that has been such a massive resource for our parents. They have really leaned on that group and relied on that group to help get them through probably one of the toughest times in their working career. But it is so important to have those organic groups from within as support systems. Surveying your employees as well, as you touched on, Caitlin, it's important to know where people are at. And I think that celebrating and recognizing the work of your working parents is really important as well. Like, we should be celebrating and normalizing these moments in everyday life at work. So whether it's life events and recognizing important family milestones, like that needs to become part of everyday life at work. Because again, I think we start to break down those barriers of this notion of work and life at home being two separate things. I think that there are more and more candidates that are talking about these things, that are asking about what sort of programs companies have in place for working parents. What's your flexibility like? And they're being very intentional about stating that their expectations are that they are a family first type of a person. And so I want to be in an organization that is a family first organization. So I think, again, it's making sure that you're looking at your policies, your leave policies, everything that lens over every single thing that you are doing, because it's, as I said, it's an expectation, and it's important if we're going to make headway on this at all.
Right. Sarah, you definitely got agreement from Ron and Caitlin as well. So this is something that is coming up in interviews that people are asking about, which was a question that came up from the audience. I want to remind audience members, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and submit them as I'm watching the time. I want to make sure to get in as many questions as possible. If I were to summarize some of them, so we've talked a bit about policy, we've talked a bit about tactics, but some of what we've alluded to has been more about culture, having conversations, celebrating working parents. But some of the questions kind of touch upon that. What do you say to employers who worry about overstepping privacy boundaries when trying to ask their employees about childcare situations? And another question, how do you normalize these conversations between managers and working parents? Any advice? I open it up to all three of you.
I'll just start by saying that I don't think any working parent is going to say, please don't step into my business when it comes to trying to figure out how to do their job and do their life at the same time. I know that, I sort of smirk when saying this, but, prior to having a child, I didn't really understand what that meant to be a working parent, right? And there are times in the last 2 years that I have said to my boss, who has 2 sons and was, who had two young sons and a thriving career. And I will say to her in the last, how did you do this? How did you travel? I mean, at least I had the benefit of 18 months of no travel. That has, sort of been helpful, right? And I think that conversation, just that moment of truth and just understanding that's happening with leadership and teams and bosses and managers and so on and so forth, whether it be an HR team or whether it just be a conversation that you are having with your colleague, it truly matters now, because the solutions aren't always going to be these long-term, overarching huge portfolio solutions, right? Sometimes it's just take this meeting for me, and that is a life changer. And, I think Ron brought this up, Sarah's brought this up, and I will just say it again, that we all have a lot, I'm sure a lot of us watching this particular video are, sort of the luxury of a 9-to-5 job, but the challenges that exist in the 24 working hour shifts that we experience now are so real and so difficult for working parents. And I would just point out to Ron's great examples of companies. So another one, Patagonia, that has been doing this for a really long time. And they have focused on that third shift challenge and have brought in center-based care to their facilities. That has been life-changing. Their retention rate is through the roof. It's actually difficult to get a job there, right? Like, what company wouldn't want that problem right now? So I just say that, like, if you're worried about the words, don't be worried about how your interest in trying to help somebody is going to come across, because they're going to appreciate it.
Right. So the openness, but also this is a way to cultivate employee loyalty. If you get it, you put that effort forward.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Long, I would add to what Caitlin rightly said, is that as we become better learners, and if you're worried about the privacy issue, surveys and a number of other tools can be used to anonymize the feedback or whatever. But so that's not really a barrier to us learning from employees. But that I, as you do, Dr. Long, spend a lot of my time in education, and learning is incomplete if there is not an applied demonstration of the skill or the knowledge acquired. So this means that companies need a culture of doing as well, not just a culture of listening and hearing and learning. The learning is not complete without that. And then I think that it goes a long way to build the culture of belonging when you put people in the driver's seat to be a part of the solution making as well. And as I said earlier, I think you have to reward them for their leadership in doing so.
Right. I think someone mentioned earlier kind of working committees, actually getting the working parents together to help create the solutions. And part of it, learning, is doing, but then also making adjustments along the way. You don't have to get everything right, but certainly taking steps. Another great question got from the audience: is there a way to address childcare deserts where people in the workforce may not have access to a nearby childcare facility or childcare professional? How do we address this issue of accessibility along with issues of affordability and supporting our working parents?
I'm happy to start, unless you want to, Ron, but this is a extremely important issue, right? Like, there are places that still in this country have absolutely no access to childcare, and that is so difficult for any employee in any employer. There are some state funds that go out annually called CCDBG funds, Child Care Development Block Grant funds. Lot of challenges in just getting that to the right places. But there is one important note that I will make, that that particular fund, the Child Development Block Grant, which is a block grant, so in the world of federal government, that's like the most flexible money you could ever find. It does get itself all locked up in other challenges once it goes to the states, but we will leave that to the side point. It got a 600% increase in the last 18 months through a myriad of reasons, through CARES 1, 2, through ARP. There's been a lot of money that has gone out to that, which means that your states are in the process right now, actually very much right now, they need to develop these plans on how they're going to get this money, particularly the American Family Plan, the American Rescue Plan money needs to be put into place by the end of December. And so if you are not having those conversations as an employer that knows that there is a childcare desert that you and your employees are experiencing with your Health and Human Services Department, like, now is the time to do that, because they can help solve that with you. And this money is there to essentially create that conversation, right? And to help try to solve some of these issues. So I'd leave it at that.
A couple of ways that I think we can think about this, and I think we saw a little bit of this over the pandemic, is that there were some experiments with childcare and early learning licensing so that they were expedited in some places. A lot of that was the reaction to kind of collapse in some places. So I think it can still serve that purpose. But where we have folks who want to be in the business and have the qualifications to do so, but licensing is a hurdle, let's figure out what an expedited program of licensing looks like. I think I would also want to figure out, what some basic investment in the business is, and not tell folks, you can have the license, but, maybe take the little bit of capital that you have to really accelerate your startup and try to get it done on your own. Let's figure out what some of the minimum investment is. I think there's also a role for K-12 in this. And as I think about the Student Opportunity Act, in that we will be thinking about what the implementation of that looks like and how districts will be spending their money. I do think that there need to be some criteria or incentives created for districts to invest in early childhood and not simply backfill on certainly a number of things that we've lost, or even historically things that were gaps in districts, especially in high needs districts. Let's tell people that there is more for you if you make this critical investment, and certainly more for you if you lean into education innovation as well. I think the state will lose overall if SOA is simply backfilling.
Okay. Well, I'm mindful of the time. I know we're getting to the end here. So I want to give each one of you a chance for some closing comments with this overarching question of how can employers lead the way, and then what are the consequences if they don't take action? Sarah, I wonder if you could start us off.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that we need to be really pushing for better across the board. I think especially big corporations have a real place to be able to institute some real change here because they can hopefully push this in as more of a holistic issue. Like this is bigger than just a business issue. We can try to solve for it as best we can, but we really need to be pushing for this to be a more holistic issue at the federal level, at the state level. And I think bigger corporations actually can have an impact in doing that. I think the consequence to not fixing this is I was just reading an article the other day that was stating that we potentially as women in the workplace have lost 10 years worth of progress to where we've come today. And with all of the women that are leaving the workforce in droves. And that's a really sobering thought to think. I mean, we've made so much progress and we've come so far. I'm concerned about women's ability to continue to thrive both inside and outside of the workplace if we do not get ahead and get a handle on this issue.
Thank you, Sarah. Ron?
Sure, and thank you, everyone. Sarah and Caitlin and Dr. Long, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I hope that we have another opportunity to do this. A few ways that I think business can lean in. Keep learning. For one, there's a lot of information that we continue to need to collect from employees and to get more nuanced about it, because I'm not sure that we're at the depth of really understanding the differentiated needs of families who work for us as well. So I think that there's another layer of depth that will help us to get to more equitable solutions the more that we learn. And let's publish this. Let's say what we're learning. Let's say what's working and what's not working and put it in the public domain. Secondly, keep experimenting. Whether it is through benefits-based approaches, partnerships directly with providers, whatever it is, let's keep experimenting. And again, sharing what's working and what's not working and what has the potential for scale, and use our business tools to help the public understand as we get clear about the most powerful solutions. How much is it going to cost? What's the investment look like to do this at scale? Also, we didn't talk about this a lot, but I would love to see business use its expertise to bring more sustainability to the early childhood field. So much in the same way that organizations like Goodwin Procter on a pro bono basis came to the field to help many providers secure PPP loans, we need a number of business leaders, experts, and firms helping with payroll, helping with back office functions and some other things, even on a pooled basis, so that we can start to decrease some of the cost of doing business. I'm not sure that that is fully the path to economic sustainability, but we do know that there are some inefficiencies there and some business practices that can be improved. And arguably, I think one of the most powerful investments that we can make in women-led businesses is to make sure we invest deeply in this sector and the livelihoods of these business owners. And then lastly, advocate with and not just for the early childhood field. Business is going to have to respect the leadership of parents and providers and advocates in the field. Come alongside them, use the power of your voice and the unique perspective that business has about why this is important at a legislative and ultimately structural, civic and social contract level.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your comments. And Caitlin, to close things out.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. And Ron and Sarah, it's great to be on this panel with you. Thank you so much, Dr. Long. I just would echo, start the conversation with your employees, survey them, create those working groups, really try to understand what the challenges are. Sometimes they're extremely simple to try to help solve. Flexibility is sometimes just the only thing that is sought after, and that is really not even a cost. And sometimes it is a little bit deeper and you need to go through that whole process, but you have to go through the process to know how to solve the problem. And then in terms of consequences, I would just say we're living it right now. There is millions of open jobs and there are millions of people on the bench. And a lot of those people are citing the fact that they don't have anyone to watch the kids. So we got to figure it out. And I'm really honored to have been part of this conversation to start thinking about solutions. So thanks.
No, thank you to all three of our panelists. Very much appreciate it. Wonderful conversation, and thank you for everyone who's attended. And now I'm going to turn it over to Celia Richa from the Chamber.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Long. Thank you, Ron, Caitlin, Sarah. I was listening intently, especially Ron, as you were saying the cost, because I have one kid in daycare and yeah, $20,000 for one, thinking about a second and I want to cry. I'm sure many people do. So thank you all so very much. Wrapping it up quickly because we're out of time, but I know Caitlin, you mentioned some federal level policies. There's also efforts here at the state level. So I am going to mention an act to provide relief for the cost of childcare, which is a bill that the Chamber and other business groups are supporting that would double the mass personal income tax deduction. So we'll put more of that in the chat and follow up with that and some of the resources you all shared. Special shout out again to JD Chesloff and Tom Weber, who are leading the way for the business community in Eastern and the foundation. So thank you. Thank you to our sponsor, Liberty Mutual. For those who want to stay and continue the conversation, on the left-hand side of your screen, there are networking rooms. So please join those if you want to keep it going. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Long, Caitlin, Sarah, and Ron. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.